Okay, gang. In the last segment, I went over mounting the scope to your tactical carbine. What I'm going to talk about here is just basically torquing the scope down. This is one of these places where you do need a specialized tool. You need a torque wrench that's graduated in inch pounds. I've been using this fat wrench from Wheeler Engineering for a while. Seems to be a pretty good tool. I haven't had any problems with it. The reason you need this, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, you want to make sure that you get your mounting hardware tight enough that it's not going to come loose, particularly if you're shooting. You don't want the scope moving around, or if it gets bumped against something, you don't want it falling out of there. But also, just as importantly, you don't want to damage your rifle or your mount or your optic while you're torquing these things down, or while you're tightening the screws down. I have, back in my wild and wayward youth, torqued down screws without a torque wrench, or tightened them down without a torque wrench, and I have damaged scope tubes before. Since I've been using a torque wrench and tightening them down to manufacturer's specifications, I have not over-tightened anything and damaged any of the optics or any of the other parts of the mounting hardware or the rifle itself. So it is imperative to make sure you have the proper tool for the job on this one. What I'm going to do before I start to torque anything, though, is I am just going to tighten the screws down a little bit. Now, I'm not going to put any torque on these whatsoever. All I'm really doing is taking a lot of the slack out of this. So when I start to use the torque wrench, I'm not turning and turning and turning without accomplishing anything. And as soon as I start to feel a little bit of resistance on these, I stop. Now, as I said in the first segment, you want to have about the same amount of gap on either side of your rings when you start this process. You don't want to have a big gap on one side and a small gap on the other side, because you want to torque down the tops of your rings evenly. Right now I've got a little bit more torque on, or a little bit more gap on the right side of this ring than I do on the left side, so I'm just going to do a little bit of adjusting here. Again, as soon as I start to feel resistance on this, I'm stopping. That's pretty close to about the same there. Going to look at the gap on the rear, and that is pretty close right now. So again, all 6 of these screws I'm going to tighten down just till I start to feel a little bit of resistance. I'm just basically taking up the slack in these screws. By the way, I'm going to close my scope covers there just to make sure I don't inadvertently scratch a lens with one of my tools or anything like that. Okay, before I start to tighten my ring halves, since I already know that I've got the scope in the proper location on the base, I'm going to go ahead and tighten down my base screws. Manufacturer's recommendations for torque on the PEPR base are 65 inch-pounds per square inch. So I am going to adjust my wrench to 65 inch-pounds. That ought to do it right there. Alright, I've got my torque wrench adjusted to 65 inch-pounds. I've got my 2 base screws here, and all I'm going to do when I start to tighten these is just alternate back and forth, give each one about a quarter of a turn until I reach the proper torque setting of 65 inch-pounds. You'll know when you're getting close because you'll start to feel resistance in the screws. There's 65 on the front and 65 on the back. So now I know that I have these torqued precisely to 65 inch-pounds. Now before I go any farther, I am going to double check my reticle and make sure nothing in the tightening process caused it to move. And the reticle still looks good, so I'm now ready to proceed to tightening the ring halves. As I said in part 1 of this video, when I tighten these, and again I'm going about 1/4 of a turn at a time, and I'm going to tighten them just like you tighten lug nuts on a tire, where I alternate from screw to screw. And I'm also going to alternate from front to back, so I'm torquing everything down evenly. I'm not putting any undue stress on my scope tube. On the ring screws, the proper torque setting per the literature that came from Burris is about 20 inch-pounds. So we're going to take these down, each one of them, to 20 inch-pounds. And again, I'm going about 1/4 of a turn. There's 20 inch-pounds on that one. And on that one. And that one. So I'm going to go ahead and just finish up this front ring. I'm going to go to the back. Same thing. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now last thing I'm going to do, again just kind of like with a car tire, is go through each one of these and make sure I didn't somehow miss one during the course of tightening. Same thing with the back ring. That's it. Now I've got my rings properly torqued down. I've got pretty much the same gap on both sides. I'm going to check my reticle one last time. Make sure it didn't move during the tightening process, which sometimes it will, which is why we tighten it down like a car tire. And the reticle looks good. That's all there is to it. I hope you found this informative. If you have any questions or comments, be sure to leave them. Other than that, y'all have a good day. Bye-bye.